My name is Caroline Mercer. I'm 31 years old. Before my marriage broke open, I used to think betrayal would be loud. I thought it would sound like a glass shattering in the sink, a front door slamming hard enough to rattle picture frames, a confession hurled across a kitchen table so violently there would be no doubt where the damage began. I was wrong. Sometimes betrayal arrives politely. Sometimes it brings groceries. Sometimes it folds baby clothes with careful hands and smiles at you across your own living room while something rotten is already growing underneath the floorboards. When I was pregnant with my son, everyone kept telling me how lucky I was. I had a husband with a good job, a house with a nursery painted pale blue, a mother who lived 20 minutes away and insisted on helping with everything. A marriage that, from the outside, looked warm and ordinary in the best way. The kind of marriage people point to when they want to believe decent things still happen to decent people. My husband's name was Nathan Reed. We had been together 5 years, married for 2. He was not a cruel man in the obvious sense. That almost makes this worse to explain. He wasn't explosive. He wasn't the kind of man who left bruises or made scenes in restaurants. He was easy to like, thoughtful in small public ways. He remembered birthdays. He carried heavy things without being asked. He kissed my forehead when I was tired. He knew exactly how to look like a good man from across the room. And maybe once, in the beginning, he had been one. I loved him. I need that said clearly. This was not one of those dead marriages people use as an excuse afterward. We were not living like strangers. We were not trapped in bitterness. We had routines, inside jokes, shared plans. We argued about ordinary things like paint colors and grocery lists, and whether we should spend money replacing the dishwasher before the baby came. We were building a life, and I thought we were building it together. My mother, Elaine Mercer, became a constant presence once I was about 4 months pregnant. At first, it felt like a gift. She brought soup when nausea made me miserable. She helped me wash baby clothes before folding them into perfect little stacks on the nursery chair. She ran errands. She said all the right things in the right soft tone. Whenever I thanked her, she would smile and say, "That's what mothers do." I believed her. There are moments that only become suspicious after the fact. A silence when I walked into the kitchen. Nathan standing just a little too still when my mother brushed past him. A joke that didn't make sense because I hadn't heard the beginning of it. Once, late in the afternoon, I came downstairs after a nap and found them on the back patio. Not touching. Not doing anything you could name. Just sitting a little too close with 2 glasses of wine between them and expressions that vanished too quickly when they saw me. Nathan smiled first. "There she is," he said, like I had interrupted something harmless. My mother lifted her glass and gave me that easy, familiar look that mothers perfect over decades. Calm, warm, unreadable if you still trust them. I told myself pregnancy was making me sensitive. That is one of the humiliating parts of this story. Not that I was blind, that I saw enough to feel uneasy and then spent weeks persuading myself that my own instincts were unfair. Nathan had explanations for everything. Work was exhausting him. The upcoming baby had him stressed. He seemed distracted because he was worried about money, about responsibility, about becoming a father. Those explanations were plausible because life is generous with plausible lies. Meanwhile, my mother kept showing up. She knew which days Nathan worked from home. She somehow always seemed to arrive at the right hour, when I was lying down, when I was showering, when I had gone out to a prenatal appointment, and one of them could casually mention later that she had just stopped by for a minute. I noticed it. Then I didn't notice it. Then I noticed it again so sharply it made my chest hurt. One evening, I asked Nathan lightly whether he ever thought my mother was around a little too much. He looked up from his phone and laughed once, not cruelly, just enough to make me feel foolish. "She's helping," he said. "Caroline, she adores you." That should have comforted me. Instead, something inside me went quiet. My due date was in March. By February, I was heavy with the baby, sleeping badly, waking at strange hours, with the feeling that I had forgotten something important. Nathan was gentler then, almost overcorrecting. He brought me tea, rubbed my back, talked about the future in a way that soothed me just enough to keep me from staring too hard at the cracks. My mother helped finish the nursery. She stood in the doorway one afternoon, smoothing the curtain fabric with her fingers and said, "You really got the life you wanted." At the time, I thought she sounded proud. Much later, I understood the sentence differently. The night I went into labor, Nathan told me he had a client dinner across town. I remember standing in the kitchen with one hand braced against the counter while he adjusted his tie. My back had been aching all day in a strange rhythm I hadn't wanted to name. The hospital bag was by the door. My sister Lila was on standby in case things moved quickly. Nathan kissed my cheek before leaving. "Call me if anything changes," he said. As if I wouldn't. The first contraction that made me stop breathing came just before midnight. I called him at 11:38. No answer. I called again 7 minutes later. Slower this time because the pain was beginning to grab me from the spine and wrap around to the front like something tightening. Still nothing. By the third call, Lila was already in my driveway, and I was holding the edge of the sink trying not to panic. "Where is he?" she asked. I looked at the phone in my hand and said, "I don't know." That turned out to be the truest sentence I spoke all night. Lila drove me to the hospital. Contractions stacked harder and faster. Nurses moved around me in bright, efficient shapes. Someone asked where my husband was. I said he was on his way, and even then I heard the crack in my own voice. He arrived after midnight, late enough for me to see it. Late enough for Lila to look at him with a disgust she didn't bother hiding. Not late enough, unfortunately, to miss the moment our son entered the world. When they placed the baby on my chest, everything else vanished for one suspended second. The fear, the anger, the questions, all of it. He was warm and damp and furious at being born. And I cried the way women cry when their bodies are split open and remade in the same hour. Nathan held my hand. He kept saying, "He's perfect, he's perfect." I turned my face toward him because I wanted, desperately, for that moment to be real enough to save us. Our son's name was Owen. For 4 days, I tried to believe the worst thing that had happened was that my husband had almost missed the birth. I told myself we were tired, emotional, adjusting. I watched Nathan hold Owen and thought maybe fatherhood would settle whatever had been drifting loose inside him these past months. I watched my mother come to the hospital with flowers and a soft cardigan draped over her shoulders and a face composed into maternal concern. She kissed my forehead. She held my son. She stood at the foot of my hospital bed and asked if I needed anything. I said no. I should have been more specific, because what I actually needed was the truth, and by then, it was already in my house waiting for me. We came home on a Thursday afternoon. The house looked exactly the way we had left it. Clean counters, folded blankets, the faint smell of detergent from the last load of baby clothes my mother had insisted on doing before we left for the hospital. Nothing in the room warned me. That's the thing about collapse. It doesn't announce itself with broken furniture or overturned chairs. Sometimes it waits patiently inside ordinary spaces until you're too tired to defend yourself against it. Owen slept in the car seat as Nathan carried him inside. I followed slowly, one hand pressed against my abdomen, every step reminding me that my body was still recovering from something violent and irreversible. "Let's get you to the couch," Nathan said. His voice was gentle, careful. "Practiced." I lay down. Owen stayed asleep. The house was quiet in a way that should have felt peaceful, but didn't. It felt staged, like everything had been reset just a little too neatly. My mother arrived an hour later. She didn't knock. She let herself in the way she always had. "There's my boy," she said softly, moving straight toward Owen. She didn't look at Nathan first. She didn't look at me long either. Just a quick scan, a small smile, and then all her attention poured into the baby like nothing else in the room existed. If you had filmed that moment, it would have looked like devotion. It took me 4 days to understand what I was actually watching. The first thing was small, a receipt. It was folded into Nathan's jacket pocket when I went to hang it up. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just trying to do something normal with my hands while Owen slept and my mind struggled to keep up with my body. The receipt was from a restaurant, not the one Nathan had mentioned for his client dinner. Different neighborhood, different time, 2 glasses of wine. I stood there holding it, staring at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves into something reasonable if I waited long enough. They didn't. When Nathan came into the room, I asked him about it. Lightly. Too lightly. "Oh, that?" he said, barely glancing. "Plans changed. Clients picked somewhere else." He didn't hesitate. That was the first moment something inside me sharpened instead of softened. Because hesitation I could have explained. Confidence I could not. The second thing came the next morning. A message. Not a full conversation. Just a fragment. A notification that flashed across Nathan's phone while it was sitting face up on the kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to read it, but I saw enough. "Last night was a mistake. It can't happen again." No name attached. No context. Just that single line. Nathan grabbed the phone too quickly. Turned it over. Said nothing. I didn't ask. That was the shift. Up until that moment, I had been a wife trying to understand her husband. After that moment, I became something else. Someone quiet. Someone watching. People think calm means forgiveness. It doesn't. Sometimes calm is just distance forming in real time. I started paying attention to details I had previously ignored. How often my mother texted, the exact tone she used with Nathan versus the tone she used with me. The way Nathan's explanations came a fraction of a second too fast, like he had rehearsed them somewhere I couldn't see. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because I had Owen. Because I was healing. Because instinct, real instinct, not the kind I had been dismissing for months, told me that whatever this was, it was already bigger than a single argument. And arguments could be denied. Evidence could not. On the fourth day, I found it. I wasn't searching for something dramatic. I was looking for a charger in Nathan's office drawer. That's where I found the envelope. Plain, unmarked, too deliberately tucked beneath a stack of paperwork to be accidental. Inside were printed messages. Dozens of them. Dates. Times. Conversations that stretched back months. I didn't read all of them. I didn't need to, because the names at the top of the page told me everything before the words ever could. Nathan. Elaine. My husband. My mother. For a second, the room tilted. Not in a dramatic way. Not like something you could describe in a story and make sound cinematic. It was quieter than that. More precise. Like something inside my body had been removed without warning, and the space it left behind didn't know how to hold itself up. I sat down in Nathan's chair. Owen was asleep in the bassinet down the hall. The house was silent. And in that silence, every moment from the past few months rearranged itself into something coherent. The patio, the wine glasses, the timing of her visits, the missed calls, the calm. It all clicked into place with a kind of clarity that made me feel stupid for ever needing proof. I didn't cry. That's important, because crying would have meant I still believed there was something left to lose. What I felt instead was stillness. Cold. Complete. Final. When Nathan came home that afternoon, I was sitting in the living room. Owen beside me. The envelope on the table. I didn't look at Nathan when he walked in. I heard him pause. Felt the shift in the air as he noticed something was wrong. "Caroline," he said. I didn't answer. He stepped closer. Slower now. Careful in a way that confirmed everything before he even saw the envelope. "What is it?" I turned my head then. Looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time since I had met him, I saw exactly who he was without any of the softness I had wrapped around him. "I know," I said. 2 words. Flat. He froze. Not confused. Not defensive. Frozen. Because he knew exactly what I meant. His eyes moved to the envelope. Then back to me. His mouth opened. I lifted my hand. Just slightly. "Don't." 1 word. That was all it took. Something closed in that moment. Not just between us. Inside me. He tried anyway. Of course he did. "Caroline, I can explain." "No," I said, quieter now. "You can't." Because explanations belong to situations where the truth is unclear. This wasn't unclear. This was documented. Time-stamped. Deliberate. "How long?" he asked, like that was the question that mattered. I almost laughed. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at Owen, at his small chest rising and falling in steady, oblivious rhythm. "Long enough," I said. That answer covered everything. My mother didn't come that evening, or the next day, or the day after that. She called once. I let it ring. She didn't leave a voicemail. Of course she didn't. What would she say? Nathan stayed in the house. I didn't ask him to leave. That confused him. I could see it in the way he hovered at the edges of rooms, waiting for a reaction that never came. No yelling. No crying. No thrown objects. Just distance. Measured. Intentional. I moved Owen's bassinet into the guest room that night, closed the door, fed him in the quiet, spoke to him in a soft voice that had nothing to do with Nathan anymore. Nathan stood in the hallway once, watching, like he was waiting for permission to step inside a life he no longer belonged to. I didn't give it. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I did it at the kitchen table, in full view. Nathan was standing 3 feet away. He heard every word. "Yes," I said into the phone. "I'm ready to move forward." I didn't look at him when I said it. I didn't need to, because by then I was already gone. The first week passed without a single raised voice. That was the part Nathan didn't understand. He kept waiting for something loud, a breaking point he could respond to, a moment he could interrupt, defend himself against, argue his way out of. But I had already moved past the stage where arguments mattered. By then, everything was logistics. I reorganized the house. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would make a scene. Just enough to redraw the boundaries. Owen stayed with me in the guest room. His things moved there. His clothes, his diapers. The small, fragile center of my life shifted 10 feet down the hall and took everything important with it. Nathan remained in our bedroom. The door between those 2 spaces might as well have been a locked gate. At night, Owen would wake, soft cries at first, then louder if I didn't reach him quickly enough. I would sit up, still sore, still healing, and move through the dark with practiced care. I never asked Nathan for help. He offered once. I can take him, he said, standing in the doorway like someone unsure if they were allowed to exist. I didn't look at him. I've got it. It wasn't anger. It was removal. And that frightened him more. During the day, he tried to talk. Caroline, please. We need to figure this out. There was something desperate in his voice now. Something cracking. I kept my tone even. There's nothing to figure out. That's not true. It is, I said. You just don't like the answer. He flinched at that. Not because it was cruel. Because it was precise. By the second week, the legal process had already begun moving in ways he couldn't see. That was the difference between us. Nathan reacted. I prepared. I had spent nights while Owen slept beside me, going through every message in that envelope, every date, every timestamp. I didn't reread them for pain. I read them for structure, patterns, consistency, choice, because this wasn't one mistake. It was a sequence, and sequences are easy to document. On Monday morning, I made the call. Nathan was in the kitchen pouring coffee when I did it. Yes, I said into the phone. I'd like to proceed with a formal separation. I didn't lower my voice. I didn't step outside. He heard it, every word. The mug in his hand stayed suspended halfway to the counter for a second too long. When I hung up, he looked at me like the room had shifted under his feet. You're serious? He asked. I met his eyes then. Finally. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He tried to salvage something after that. Apologies came first, then explanations, then promises, each one less effective than the last. It didn't mean anything, he said one night. I almost asked him to repeat it, not because I hadn't heard him, because I wanted him to hear himself. Instead, I said, it meant enough for you to keep doing it. He had no response to that. There wasn't one. The letter arrived in the third week. A clean envelope, professional, neutral. I placed it on the kitchen counter where he would see it. I didn't hand it to him. I didn't explain it. I let him open it alone. I heard the paper unfold, the silence stretch, then his voice tight and unsteady. 7 days? I kept my back to him, rinsing Owen's bottles at the sink. That's what it says. No unsupervised contact, he continued, like reading it out loud might change the words. Caroline, this is extreme. I turned the water off, dried my hands slowly. Then I faced him. No, I said, it's accurate. He stared at me, really stared this time, like he was trying to find the version of me he used to recognize. She wasn't there anymore. He moved out at the end of the week. It wasn't dramatic. No slammed doors. No last speech. Just boxes. A suitcase. A man who had finally realized that the life he thought he could step in and out of at will had already sealed itself without him. He paused at the door before leaving. Caroline, please, he said, don't do this. I held Owen in my arms, felt the small weights of him settle against my chest. I already did, I said, and that was it. Month 1 passed quietly. That's another thing people misunderstand. They expect aftermath to feel explosive. It doesn't. It feels like absence. Nathan's side of the closet empty. His shoes gone from the hallway. His presence erased so completely, it started to feel like he had never lived there at all. But consequences don't stay contained. They spread. I didn't contact his job. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of moving on its own when enough people already suspect something is wrong. Someone saw something. Someone heard something. Someone connected a detail that didn't fit. And then it was out. Nathan told me later, through his lawyer, how it happened. A meeting. A closed door. A conversation about conduct and trust. He lost his job by the end of that week. Not because I destroyed him. Because he had built something that couldn't survive exposure. The court date was set in the 3rd month. I sat in that room with Owen in a carrier beside my chair, sleeping through everything. Nathan sat across from me. He looked smaller. Not physically. Internally. Like something had collapsed inward and left him without structure. He tried to meet my eyes once. I didn't give him that. Everything he needed to understand was already in the documents. Dates. Times. Choices. My lawyer presented it clearly. Calmly. No dramatics. Just facts. The judge listened. Asked a few questions. Then looked at Nathan. You demonstrated a consistent pattern of prioritizing your own desires over your family during a critical period, she said. Her tone wasn't angry. It was worse. It was certain. There is no indication that pattern has changed. Nathan didn't argue. He couldn't, because the evidence didn't leave room for interpretation. Primary custody went to me. Supervised visitation for him. Limited. Structured. Controlled. He nodded when the ruling was read. Like he had expected it. Like part of him had known from the beginning that this was the only way it could end. My mother disappeared somewhere in the middle of all of this. No goodbye. No explanation. Her number stopped working. Her apartment was empty. Neighbors said she had moved. No one knew where. I didn't look for her. That might be the coldest thing I did. But by then, I understood something important. Some people remove themselves from the consequences they help create, and chasing them only gives them more space inside your life than they deserve. Nathan came to the supervised visits. At first, 2 hours, twice a week, a small room with neutral walls, and a social worker who observed everything with quiet, professional detachment. He would hold Owen, talk to him, try to create something resembling a bond. Owen would look at him the way babies look at unfamiliar objects. Curious, unattached, unaware. I didn't attend those visits. I didn't need to. My responsibility was to protect my son, not to witness the consequences of someone else's choices. By the 4th month, something began to shift. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. Nathan missed a visit, then another. Then he called to cancel one in advance, each absence small on its own. Together they formed a pattern. And patterns, I had learned, tell the truth more clearly than promises ever will. That was when I allowed myself to breathe. Not because things were better, but because they were finally honest. Time doesn't fix things. It just removes the noise around them. By the time Owen turned 1, the structure of our lives had settled into something quiet and stable. Predictable mornings, work during the day, evenings that belonged entirely to him. There were no raised voices in my house anymore. No tension that hummed underneath conversations. No moments where I felt like I was standing in a room with something I couldn't name. Just space. Clean. Controlled. Safe. That had become my definition of peace. Nathan's visits were reduced before Owen could even walk properly. From 2 hours twice a week to 1 hour, once. Then less consistent than that. The official explanation was adjustment concerns. The real explanation was simpler. Owen didn't know him. And children don't attach themselves to strangers just because paperwork says they should. I didn't fight the reduction. I didn't need to, because I understood something Nathan hadn't accepted yet. Presence isn't something you can negotiate back after you've given it away. He stopped coming altogether sometime in the 2nd year. Not all at once. Just less. Then rarely. Then not at all. No dramatic exit. No final conversation. Just absence. Again. The same pattern. Only this time, I didn't mistake it for anything else. People expect me to hate him. I don't. Hate requires energy. And I had already decided exactly where my energy was going to go. Into Owen. Into building something that didn't depend on whether someone else chose to show up or not. Marcus came into our lives quietly. That's the only way that would have worked. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't try to replace anything. He just stayed. The first time Owen reached for him without hesitation, I noticed it. Not because it hurt, because it confirmed something I had already accepted. Children choose consistency. Every time. Marcus was consistent. He showed up. Every morning. Every night. Every small, unremarkable moment that builds a life. There was no grand gesture. No speech. Just presence. And that was enough.
Yes.
By year 3, Owen had a routine that didn't include Nathan at all. Not in memory. Not in language. Not in the way he understood the world. He called Marcus Dad one afternoon while they were building something on the living room floor. Marcus froze for a second. Looked at me. Careful. Like he wasn't sure if that line belonged to him. I held his gaze. Then I nodded. That was all it took. Some roles aren't assigned. They're earned. I heard about Nathan occasionally. Through other people. Never directly. A smaller job. A different part of the city. A life that had narrowed itself down to something quieter. Contained. There was no dramatic downfall. No moment where everything collapsed at once. Just consequences. Steady. Permanent. Exactly proportionate to the choices that created them. I never spoke to him again. Not in person. Not on the phone. Everything that needed to be said had already been said in that living room 4 days after Owen was born. I know. Don't. That was enough. People ask me sometimes if I regret not confronting my mother. If I regret not demanding an explanation. Closure. That word people use when they want something emotional to feel finished. I don't. Because closure suggests there was something left open. There wasn't. Some actions explain themselves completely. The house changed over time. New furniture. Different photos on the walls. Owen growing into spaces that once felt too quiet. Laughter returning in small, careful pieces until one day I realized it wasn't careful anymore. It was just normal. There's a room at the end of the hall. It used to be ours. Now it's something else. Not symbolic. Not dramatic. Just a room. That's what happens when you stop attaching meaning to things that no longer serve you. They become ordinary again. One day Owen is going to ask. Not now. Not yet. But someday, he'll notice. He'll compare. He'll ask why his life looks the way it does. And when he does, I won't tell him a story designed to protect anyone. I won't soften it. I won't turn it into something complicated. Because it isn't. The truth is simple. His father made choices, and those choices had consequences. That's it. If there's one thing I understand now that I didn't before, it's this. Betrayal doesn't destroy your life. It reveals it. It shows you exactly what you're standing on. What's solid, what never was, and what needs to be removed so something better can take its place. I didn't destroy Nathan. I didn't ruin his life. I stepped out of the way and let his choices finish what they had already started. And then I built something else. Something quieter. Something stronger. Something that doesn't depend on promises. Only on presence. Owen is 3 now. He sleeps down the hall. He laughs easily. He trusts completely. And every day, I make sure that trust is placed in something that won't disappear when it matters most. Because some people don't get second chances. Not because they don't want them. Because some choices remove the possibility entirely.